All right, we started recording there, Gabe.
Hello? Are we on?
Yes, we're on the air now.
Hello. This is Gabe and Zab's weekly film show.
Right.
And this is our second installment. And the date is Friday the 13th of April.
Right.
And here is our show. And we are starting. That's Zav, wonderful owner of River West Film and Video, and I'm Gabe Van Handel.
All right, so go ahead, Gabe, and get us started off with the first part of our show.
All right, here is some movie news. This last weekend, last Friday, April the 6th, The Hunger Games opened at first for the box office. Number one, which was somewhat unexpected. A lot of people thought that American Reunion was going to topple The Hunger Games off its throne, but it did not. The Hunger Games took in $33.5 million for a grand total of $302 million. The Hunger Games passing the $300 million mark this fast is surprising some box office analysts and not surprising others. It has already grossed more than any of the Twilight movies domestic and all but two of the Harry Potter films. It's the sixth fastest pace at the box office of any film ever. Second behind Avatar as far as non-sequels are concerned. American Reunion opened second with $21.5 million, which is a very disappointing return for Universal Pictures. It's the second lowest in the series besides the original debut. American Pie 2 and American Wedding both had huge returns, and their worldwide take was disturbing in its numbers, which was the fuel for bringing this fourth entry in the series back after a 9-year hiatus. Though not as harsh of a fourth return as Scream 4 was in terms of a disappointing debut, which was also last April. April is a very tough season for movies at the box office because May is when the real season starts, when the summer movie season really begins. A lot of blockbusters debut in May, more than they had about 10 years ago, and it started off really with Spider-Man and the Spider-Man series, which really propelled movies, especially superhero films, to begin launching in May. And there were a couple of factors which they think contributed to American Reunion not killing it and not taking in the numbers that they suspected. They think that women didn't go to this movie as much because of the Hunger Games still being in the theater, that multiple viewings of the Hunger Games took a lot of the audience, that Titanic being in the theater and opening up took a lot of people. Easter is a really tough weekend for R-rated movies. It's a very family-orientated weekend, and it's a weekend when a lot of people are busy with their older relatives. Taking them to see American Reunion is not a priority. It's not what you're going to take grandpa or grandma or your parents to, for that matter. Though I saw the original one with my father when I was 13, it was a very uncomfortable experience, and I will never forget it. I was very happy that he took me to the movie because it was his way of really showing me that he was cool, and my dad is really cool. He really is an awesome parent, but it was genuinely uncomfortable to sit in a sex raunchy comedy with your parents. So that didn't go in their favor. I don't know why they didn't think that through.
And that's something that comes up in all the whole series. There's always some sex. There's all kinds of things involving your parents.
And how awkward it is to have any sort of sexual talk with your parents.
Yeah, they play on that all the time.
And this is, however, the best R-rated debut on Easter weekend since Panic Room a decade ago. Another thing is that the American Pie previous entries were all summer releases. This is not rocket science. Release this movie in summer and you will get good numbers. That's when teenagers, your prime audience, are going to see this. I think they were expecting that a huge amount of people, 25 to 40, were going to go see this. But a lot of people that invested in the previous entries did not go to this movie because they simply don't care anymore.
Well, it's funny because when you go to the theater, like when we went to the Mayfair Mall yesterday, theater, and it's almost kind of, it's like being channel surfing because there's so many theaters to choose from. I mean, you go to a movie, movie theaters now, and it's like, how many theaters were in there? 17 or something?
There's 18 theaters.
18 theaters in this one place. It kind of does the same thing as surfing the net or whatever, where you just have so many choices that it diminishes the value of everything. You know
of
what I
doing
mean?
anything.
Yeah, it's just sort of like, well, I could just walk into the next room and watch, Alvin and the Chipmunks.
people do at that theater.
Oh yeah, I did. I got in trouble for it. They told me that I was a movie hopper, theater hopper.
Well, that's really
like
huge at that theater, actually, which is really strange. Is that at that theater, you'll notice them too, that they come in for about 10 minutes of a movie and then they'll walk out.
Yeah.
And there's one guy in particular who during certain weeks in the summer when I would particularly go to 3 movies in a row at that theater,
right,
or when I'd go to a movie on every Friday or every Saturday night, there's this guy with dreads that would walk in, and he'd walk in sitting there for about 10 minutes and then walk out and sort of look on his phone and act like, this movie ain't good enough for me.
Right.
And it was just really odd because, by movie surfing, you really absorb nothing.
Yeah.
Know, and that's actually a real prominent problem that they have at that theater, except that it continues to happen. But it doesn't surprise me at all because it's like with all these options, it's almost like you don't, even when you do make a choice, you almost don't choose. You don't have a final answer.
I mean, I felt like we were looking for American Reunion, and it had it was sort of tucked away towards the end of the hall and had the least interesting poster.
Yeah.
I felt like I would have probably not gone in. If I didn't know anything, I might not have gone in.
If I didn't make you go.
Yeah, if you didn't make me go, I would have been like not even interested. I feel like, do you think there must be more movies now than there were
ever
a generation ago?
Ever.
Yeah, it just seems like there's so many movies.
There's too many.
But at the same time, everything about it was extremely well produced. I mean, it's very well made.
It's a well made movie.
Picture. Yeah.
Yeah. We did go see American Reunion this week for our first review, our mainstream review.
Yeah.
But I will finish up at the box office real quick, and we will get to that review. And let me tell you, I loved making Zav watch 4 American Pie films in 1 week because he's never seen them before.
Yeah.
And it was lovely for me to make him do that. Titanic 3D opened 3rd. That was another new release besides American Reunion with 17.3 million, way down from what they expected.
So wait, are you saying that Titanic? This is the Titanic from
the same movie
from the 90s.
They just re-released it in 3D.
Okay.
And they put
they shot it in 3D or they
no,
computer
they computerized it. James Cameron can do anything with computers.
Okay.
I'm sure he's made an avatar of himself that he can actually hang out with at this point. But yeah, they put $100 million into making this 3D, and it made about 20 million less than they thought it was. So hopefully this movie kind of tinkers along. Well, not hopefully for their sakes, but seeing as that it's the second highest grossing film of all time now, I don't think it really matters whether it gets its return on a $100 million second investment. Wrath of the Titans, still kicking it with $15 million, bringing it up to 59. Mirror, Mirror with 11 million, going up to 36. Disappointing returns for that movie. Relativity Media was really hoping that they would have another hit on their hands with that film. Its $85 million budget does not look like it's going to get returned. 21 Jump Street still trucking with $10.2 million, going up to 109. The Lorax brought in $5 million, bringing its total to 198. A huge success story for DreamWorks Animation. Salmon fishing in the Yemen, 975,000, bringing it up to 4.6. Disappointing for CBS Films. It doesn't look like that studio is going to be around for very long. John Carter opened up 9th with $820,000, bringing it up to $67 million. Far cry from its $250 million budget. Safe House returned to the top 10 after slowly sinking in the top 20 with 581,000, bringing its grand total up to 124 million. Big success story there. Opening this week, today, this Friday, the 13th, The Cabin in the Woods, which I am hugely excited for. This is the most exciting horror release to come in a long time, and I'm actually rooting for Lionsgate that they're finally putting out something intelligent and horror, which is their niche now. Trash, but this is intelligent trash.
And this is the one that we're going to review
for our show in 2 weeks.
For the show in 2 weeks with Andrew Swan.
Yes. And we're going to review The Cabin in the Woods, and we're also going to do a retrospective and an introspective on game changer horror films, on films that were huge in changing the way that the mainstream public viewed horror films and the way that fans viewed them as well. So The Cabin in the Woods, as I expected, got huge, by and large, a 92% fresh review rate on Rotten Tomatoes. even the bad reviews that I read were mostly positive, and the good reviews that I had, the negative stuff that they had to say were all, in my opinion, great attributes of great horror films. So I'm really, really excited to see this. The Three Stooges, with a few good reviews, mostly mediocre. Not the most exciting film in my book, but a lot of people really want to see this. My dad really wants to see this. There's a lot of people that I know that don't care, that are going to go see this no matter what. And I'll probably end up seeing it regardless on video. I'm actually looking forward to this. I'm just sick of hearing about this movie being in development, which is what my friend Paul Zirkle said today at work, and I had to really agree with him that I'm just glad that it's finally out, that it can finally, just we can move past this. Lockout, the PG-13 action space thriller with Guy Pearce, is finally getting released after being shelved for a while. With a disappointing 32% fresh meter on Rotten Tomatoes, I was not surprised to see this. April is a dumping ground for shelved movies. April and January is a huge time when the studios sort of come together and they say, listen, guys, we all got our little demons. We all got our skeletons in the closet. Why don't we just all throw them together at the same time and let's see who has the best deck. Let's see who has the best, who has the best hand here. And Lockout's just one of those movies that was kind of sitting around and they had to get rid of it. They had to throw it out there to see how it's going to do. I don't think it's going to do much business. I don't think that people are really interested in this movie, and I think it'll just fade. Maybe I'm wrong. Woman, Thou Art Loosed on the Seventh Day, the seemingly religious African-American film, is released. Don't really know much about it other than that it is supposed to be half decent. Bully is being released and is coming into wide release. I'm excited for that. I really, really, really want to see this film. I've heard nothing but good stuff about it.
It's controversial. Which makes people excited about talking about it. Do you think we should review that one at some point?
I think that's probably a valid thing. I mean, by that point, it might be about a month old. But I think it's an interesting film. Maybe we could throw that together with another review. So, with that being said, that is our Hollywood news for this week. There's other things that I could bring up, but I will not, other than that coming out on April 20th is The Lucky One with Zac Efron, the coming back from war drama. Think Like a Man, which we saw a trailer for, which both of us were kind of shocked that we were laughing as hard as we were during some of the moments of the trailer. That's the one where with Steve Harvey, where they put out the book, and
it looked like it was probably okay.
It looked like it's okay. It's by and large an African American film, geared towards African American audiences. Chimpanzee is coming out. That's a documentary which I've heard good things about. To the Arctic 3D, which I know very little about, other than that it's supposed to be. It's been getting good buzz. Warner Brothers is behind it. Meryl Streep is narrating it. Darling Companion, which looks very sentimental, is coming out. The Moth Diaries. And that looks like about it, except for some other minor releases. That's our movie news. So, moving on to the second segment in our show, the review segment.
And we should start with the American Pie series, and then we'll end with the Vanya thing.
Yeah, I'll go first. Okay. Because I cannot wait to hear what Zav has to say about the American Pie series that I convinced him that we should watch together. So my idea was that because what I anticipated the number one film at the box office was going to be the American Reunion, the fourth film in the series. It was not, but it was still the major release of the weekend. And I said, Zav, we should go see this. We have a movie review show, and this is the mainstream release. We are now film reviewers. Right. And this is what we do. So, realizing that I had to do a bit of homework too, we both realized that we had to watch 2 and 3 before seeing this movie. And Zav had to watch all 3 of the earlier entries. Right. And so, here's a little bit of information about the series. American Reunion was written and directed by John Hurwitz and Hayden Schlossberg, who also wrote all 3 of the Harold and Kumar films. They also directed Together, Part 2, where they went to Guantanamo Bay. American Wedding, which was Part 3 in the series, was directed by Jesse Dillon, who had also directed my secret guilty pleasure, How High, and a very bad Will Ferrell comedy, Kicking and Screaming. He is Bob Dylan's other son, besides Jake Dillon, who is the lead man for the Wallflowers. Adam Hertz wrote all three except this one, which was like I said, written and directed by John Hurwitz and Hayden Schlossberg. American Pie 2 was directed by J.B. Rogers, who also directed one of the worst comedies ever made, Say It Isn't So, which was produced by the Farley brothers. Mm-hmm. And here is my synopsis of the series and of this film. This film started off really, really, really strong. It had a great opening. It had a great middle act. The second act was its shining moment. Some of the unlikely funny scenes with Eugene Levy, who usually is one of the least funny elements of these movies, actually had more screen time and more time to flourish as a character, and they didn't linger on him enough to make him a sentimental character, which was ultimately the problem with many of the other characters in the film, that they took them way too seriously. Mm-hmm. That a lot of the characters in the movie were treated like they were deep emotional subjects with profound revelations about life, which is kind of the downfall of the worst moments in this series, is that it thinks it has these profound moments, or it's actually saying something relevant, or it has something to offer cinema. And what works best in the series is when it puts that completely aside and just allows it to flow naturally, and allows it to have an even pace, an even tone, and just tell jokes, mostly crotch related and mostly poop related. Mm-hmm. But what I liked the most about this entry was that it had the most laughs per minute, at least in my category. I'd say in the first third and in the second third, I laughed at just about every joke that came across the screen. Stupid as many of them were, I thought that there was a relevance to something in it. There was a genuinity that was lacking from 2 and from 1, but was definitely present in 3. And I was rooting for some of the characters. The best elements of 1 and 3, and in some cases in 4, but I'd say was missing from this entry, was that they allowed the events to just happen naturally. Mm-hmm. The characters are likable. The situations are somewhat plausible. Obviously, it's a Hollywood film. Realistic unfolding of events. There's less subplot, and there's less need, therefore, to resolve these subplots. 2 is unlikely, hokey, jokey, slapstick, over the top, and it treats its characters way, way, way too heavily, way too importantly. I liked a lot of elements of this film, but in the end, the downfall of what made 2 such an unwatchably bad and hokey experience at the cinema is what brought this film down. I thought it worked for a long time, and then it completely fell apart in the last act. In order, from best to worst, I would definitely say that American Wedding, which is part 3, is the best. This one, American Reunion, was definitely the second best. The first entry, American Pie, is the third best. And the last entry, which I hardly even want to call an entry, American Pie 2, one of the worst movies I've ever seen, is definitely in last place. American Wedding, which I thought was definitely the best entry in the series, I would say is a shockingly good comedy. And what I really liked about it was the fact that when problems arose, it never went into the territory that most wedding comedies do, that everything's off, everything's over, oh my God, what are we going to do? Everything's falling apart. The sky is falling. That never happened. The wedding's still going to happen. Right. And the way that the problems were resolved are pretty believable. Right. And the comedy is less outrageous in that film than it is in all 3 of the other entries. It was just a very toned down, very believable movie, and I genuinely was rooting for all the characters from beginning to end. Uh-huh. That's my review on the American Pie series, and that's my review on American Reunion. I guess I wouldn't recommend American Reunion in the end.
So yeah, for me it's been an interesting experience. The American Pie series has been for me an awakening experience in a few ways. As a video store owner, I should probably have known about this series, but I only know it as a box that I've been filing for years, and I didn't seeing how it has affected society in some ways, especially the younger generation. was a little bit unexpected for me. I think sometimes with films like this, you expect them to be fluff and therefore not to be taken seriously. And I think that is a mistake on the part of people like myself who maybe linger in these sort of other realms of cinema where everything is heady and intellectual. Maybe, I mean, not always, but especially when I was younger, maybe I would have this idea that something that's pulpy is not to be taken seriously, and that's a mistake that intellectual people make over and over again through history. And what I realize is that this series has had a huge impact on a lot of people's sexual awakening and their ideas of what is sex like when they're 13 years old and they haven't had sex yet, and then they watch American Pie to get their information about it. I didn't know that. This is just like as a side note. I didn't know that the word MILF comes from American Pie.
As a cultural phenomenon, that's where it comes from.
Yeah. So it's embedded itself into our lexicon, which is interesting.
It's a huge part of our culture, whether we like it or not. It's a relevant piece of American history.
Yeah, and sadly, I've been talking to people all week long about the fact that I had to watch the whole American Pie series, and I can't tell you how many people just immediately they have a reaction, which is not the reaction I would have had, which is, oh, I don't know anything about that. That's some summer movie, but the reaction that I would get from people was, oh, I don't want to admit that I've seen this film, but I can tell you that I don't want to have anything to do with it. Or anyway, I asked my friend Brain if she wanted to watch it with me because I was didn't have anything, I had a little bit of free time, and she immediately said no. And I was surprised that she, would have such a strong reaction. And then later on, I found out that she actually did see it, or she saw the first one, like with her sister or something like that. And then Poe. I mean, these are people who are like Poe is like a tramp, who like travels on trains to New Orleans and stuff, completely anti, like, what do you call it? Outside of the mainstream people who are literally outliers. Yeah. And he saw it, he knew it, because I think if you were younger, that's before you decide you're going to be like to separate yourself from society and become, a dumpster diver and a person who hops trains and lives in the streets and so on and plays is like a busker. People like that all watched American Pie when they were 13 years old or 12 years old because it's a coming of, at that period in your life, you haven't decided what kind of an adult you are yet. And children are more vulnerable to being the forces of the status quo in the mainstream. So I'm really surprised at the film. And then watching it was disturbing because of the cues that I saw that it was giving to society about sexuality and things like homophobia and male versus female gender roles and all of that stuff. And just like the rampant drinking that's just like glamorized. I mean,
wild debauchery in all four of the films is one of the things that I have a huge problem with, in that it's completely accepted. It's never questioned, and no one ever seems to an alcoholic, or no one has a problem with it. And it's continuously endorsed that anyone who's underage or anyone who's a child, there's not a problem with condoning siblings drinking, with younger people drinking. That drinking really is a totally acceptable way of conforming, and you should. In fact, was what I got out of the first one. That at the age of 13, when I saw that movie, with the message that movie really sent to me, was that to fit in, you should have sex, and you should drink, and you should have a group of guys as your friends.
Yeah, you come away. I mean, even watching this myself, I was sort of like, oh yeah, maybe getting completely hammered, drinking like shots or beer bongs is like, maybe it's not so bad. Like maybe the hangovers aren't that bad, and maybe you don't like bust your face on the sidewalk or what, the things that I normally think of when I think of these wild these like frat parties is just as an adult, when I see that kind of behavior, I just think of all the terrible things that could happen, but when you watch American Pie, it's just like this the undertone of it is like all of that is completely, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. The only thing that might happen is your mom might walk in on you while you're like masturbating or something weird, and then that'll be really embarrassing. But because you're such a go-lucky person, you'll somehow resolve it all, and you'll be able to survive the thing.
Not to mention that all the women are pretty much just treated as sex objects, especially in the first one. Is something that I didn't realize at the time, but over time I realized was really disturbing. It might be the only redeeming factor of part 2, is that at the end of it, the main character, Jim, decides that sex really is less important than chasing the girl of his dreams. It's the only redeemable factor with that turd of a movie. However, in the first one, what I really, 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 really like is that the tables turn on Jim, and that Oz, played by Chris Klein, turns out to be a pretty moralistic character and actually makes a pretty good choice, at least in terms of what he says to his friends at the end. And in fact, I remember as a kid being touched by that was actually the right thing to do. So maybe they're not as misogynistic as they seem, but I don't think most people that watch these movies are looking into it for the deeper.
Oh no, absolutely not. But to me, that's why it's so important to take these things seriously, is because of the message that's underneath the overt message, the subtext, and some of the messages that you get. Okay, for example, the opening scene is close to the opening scene. Someone gets a blowjob, and then he he first of all he tells this girl who's giving him a blowjob, or she says something like, "Let me know." And then he says, "Okay, I will." And then he's like, "Okay, now," or something, because he's about to like
finish
jizz or whatever. And and then she stops, and then he turns and
grabs a cup of beer,
jizzes into a cup of beer. And to me, it's sort of like, okay, there's all this information here, like, this is how, okay, so 13-year-olds are watching this and they're learning that this is how you do. I don't know. It just seemed like there's it's kind of like sex education for kids about how you're supposed to.
Completely ass backwards.
It's bizarre.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a bizarre thing. And then okay, so that's there's this mishap, and what's his name comes in
Stifler.
And drinks it. Stifler, right? He drinks it. And that's really cutting edge, probably, for that period of time. That's something about Mary. Was that the one where
it was around the time when Semen Jokes were just
something about Mary had
finally
that
being allowed
Semen joke.
to be, and that was huge. I mean, that was really shocking for its time.
Yeah,
in 1998, 1999. Before that, you really couldn't get away with something like that.
Right, it was unheard of. So we're already starting to transgress some of the previous. We're into a new era of what you can talk about. Like even us talking right now about it's all kind of like comes from
post-American age.
Yeah.
It's post-American Pie. I mean, and I would say that American Pie, the pre and the post-American Pie are definitely an age of moviegoing and an age of sex culture. That definitely before that there existed some sort of an innocence, and after that movie there definitely was some sort of a loss of innocence. I mean, right. I mean, a lot of people would probably say I'm looking too deeply into this, but it's just pretty relevant, and it's what I think happened. I remember after that, MILF was a pretty common term, and gratuitous sex in movies was pretty common and actually encouraged and looked forward to. And after a while, it just became like, oh yeah, this again. This is copying American Pie. Yeah. The only other phenomenon that I can think of in terms of pre and post in our modern age is Tarantino. That cinema can be clearly divided into the pre-Tarantino age and the post-Tarantino age. Maybe Scorsese is the closest thing to that in his prime in the early 90s and in the late 70s, the pre-Scorsese era and the post-Scorsese era. But the Weitz brothers, who made the first American Pie, definitely left their impact on culture.
Yeah.
As a whole.
Well, I wanted to continue along the lines of this semen thing, where, okay, so the thing that kind of struck me about it is the idea that, okay, now I thought that was kind of, it's kind of funny, kind of, but you saw they didn't cut it very well. You saw the joke coming from a mile away, and so it didn't really, like the timing wasn't so great on it, and a lot of the jokes are. This is kind of like the structural joke that happens again and again. someone is in a compromising position, doing something completely ridiculous, and someone unexpectedly walks in on them,
and then it looks like they're doing something else, and they have to pick up the pieces afterwards, and it causes a predicament within the plot that they then have to pick up, but also because of an act that they did earlier, usually involving Jim, where he actually did do the right thing, but it could be perceived that because of his previous action that he covered up, that he has had a chain of bad events and he's a bad person, and he has to clear his name later, that something he did earlier is connected to this mishap and this misunderstanding, and it's all just a big misunderstanding. I'm just a goofy Jewish guy who's just trying to get laid, and it just pisses me off. Oh God, I just was ready to vomit by the end of American Pie 2.
When you watch the whole series in a row, you just start to see this formula repeating itself over and over again. Which I don't know if I don't know if you would notice it as much if you watched one every 3 years and then waited whatever it was, like another 10 years for this one. Okay, so the thing I was going to say about that, the semen is, okay, so he swallows his friend's semen or whatever. It's like repulsive or whatever. But then he goes, it's as if he swallowed rat poison or something. He's vomiting for hours, and it's just like he's retching and retching. And I was thinking about it. I was like, I bet if that would have been reversed and if it was a female who drank that cup of beer, because it was kind of like, it could be the girl, it could be the guy, then it wouldn't have been considered, she wouldn't have been retching for an hour because she's female, and somehow by being female, like swallowing semen is okay, but if you're male, swallowing semen is like it's
rat poison.
It's rat poison. You're literally going to die. And so I feel like there's just that, to me, is like the subtext. Is like any male who may have been, I just feel like it says that if you're homosexual in any way, you are a freak of, you're completely like, you're either going to poison yourself and you're going to die, or or else you are there's something just terribly wrong.
Well, and it's such a heterosexual movie that I think that subtext is actually not far from the truth. I don't think it was their intention, but I think it's their it's the inadvertent
right
intention.
Right.
It's the accidental consequence of that filmmaking and that type of focus on sex
and so like that kind of what do you call it, that theme sort of is throughout the whole series. But what's interesting is to see how it evolves in the reunion. What's that?
In the fourth one, there's those two guys that kiss, actually.
Yeah, all of a sudden, okay, we're in 2012. So we jumped from 2003 to 2012, especially the first one's 1999 or something. And we see how much our society has evolved in terms of like accepting homosexuality. And all of a sudden there's all this homosexual stuff happening in the movie.
And they even make the joke that Stifler, half the lacrosse team was gay. And that to me was really refreshing, that it said, well, yeah, we were making all these that I think it was a big statement about American Pie 1. It was actually kind of an inside joke that they said, well, yeah, of course we were all making heterosexual jokes. We were trying to, get girls. Half of us were gay.
Right. But to me, what's annoying about it is that these people want to play it both ways. First of all, they use Stifler as this character who, and if you haven't seen any of these films, Stifler is this complete jackass character, but he's actually the best actor.
He's the best character and the best actor
besides
in the
for Eugene
series.
Levy, I would say he's pretty much the best thing in the series. He's amazing to watch as an actor, and he gets better and better.
In American Wedding, he is definitely the highlight, and he actually shines as an actor and as a character. He has the best portion of the film because he became famous after 1 and 2 came out, and he was definitely the most successful because he was in Dude, Where's My Car, and he was also in The Rundown with The Rock, and those were both really successful films. Yeah. And so he all of a sudden was no longer the clown in the background. Right. He was sort of the main focus of putting this movie together. So he had his own subplot. He had his own. He became a main character, and I think that was actually the strength and the difference between the first two entries and that one was that he was allowed to be a little bit more of a focus, but also because he still remains true to his character and he doesn't have all these problems that need to be resolved. Besides the fact that I'm sorry if I'm spoiling this great cinematic masterpiece of American Wedding for you, but he kills all the flowers that are going to be used in the wedding and then figures out a very simple, logical way to fix it. And that's literally the main problem of the film, is that Stifler is going to be at the wedding, but he actually comes across as, and the theme of the movie, what ultimately becomes the message of American Wedding, is just be yourself, which is actually the best message of all four of the movies. Most of them are pretty tacked on, but that one actually felt pretty genuine. And Stifler really helps bring that across.
And I would say that is what's good about this whole series. What I like a lot about it is the shamelessness of it, that people are just like putting it out there and letting you, it's like, here's who I am. Here's how, I'm not going to hide. We're just going to like expose ourselves. It's a little bit like Louis C.K.
Yeah.
It's that thing of just exposing your sexual foibles and all of the things that you normally are taboo and you're not supposed, and they haven't been, they are groundbreaking. A lot of the subject matter is groundbreaking. Like, it's not happened in comedy before. A lot of it. Mm-hmm. It's not things you've seen normally, except maybe with Richard Pryor or something but even then it was just kind of new material in a way. I wish I could come up with some good examples, but there's just a lot of sexual candor, which I do think is really healthy. But Stifler, what I think the way they play Stifler is they're like, okay, we're gonna do our most raunchy, nasty stuff. We're gonna have Stifler do, which is he's basically like our villain clown character, and we just have him do all the stuff. But then we put him against a tableau of these like people who you're really supposed to side with, which is all the other characters who are much more demure and sort of like reasonable
people next door,
and they get married and they have kids and they do everything the way you're supposed to, where Stifler is this guy who never grows up, and he's dysfunctional because he doesn't get married and he wants to keep being sexually promiscuous.
He wants to be in high school.
And he wants to live in high school forever. And there's just something totally irritating to me about that whole logic that keeps getting kind of compounded again and again in our society by the status quo and by the ruling class. Another thing is Stifler obviously is, and I even heard it in the commentary track, he's white trash. He is the guy of the lower class. He is a lower class of the crowd. He's the one who's lower class, and the lower class person is the person who is capable of talking all kinds of. He can transgress because he's not one of us. He's not the status quo. But then on another outlier,
he might actually be the hero of the films.
He's like the villain, I think. With everyone loves the villain, but the other one is and I'm gonna forget his name, Skyler, or no, what's his name, the smug guy, the smug character. He is I can't remember anymore, but he bugs me in all kinds of ways because he gets into tantric sex, for example, and so what he represents, I feel, is sort of like the kinds of people that he kind of represents people I know, like my peer group, which is people who are perhaps seeking enlightenment a little bit in society, looking outside. Oh, Finch, right? Finch's character is a person who is, he's kind of into yoga and tantric stuff, and he's
progressive.
He's very intellectual. Yeah. He talks about Aristotle. He talks about
but it's all kind of tacked on.
Heady and intellectual, but he's everything that the status quo hates about a heady intellectual person. He's smug. He's a snob. He's arrogant. He's really into, he takes this tantric sex thing too far, and but really deep down, he's just another dude who wants to get laid, but he's using tantric sex to do it. And so what he does is he's taking all the people who are, intellectually curious in our society and looking outside of, the malls and the McDonald's world, and they're saying, oh, you don't want to be like that guy. He's a smug snob. You know,
and they're actually fake, and these people are completely ingenuous, and they're fake, and they're not to be trusted.
Right.
Is kind of the message that I get.
Or disingenuous. Yeah.
Disingenuous is really the tone that I get from his
because,
character.
For example, that
he's like a giant hypocrite.
Because he talks about how he has like a peace sign, or he has some sort of like, he always has little things on his clothing, T-shirts that give you indications that he's into Gandhi, or he's into some sort of like, higher level thinking or whatever. But then he sits down and drinks cherry or like orange soda and potato chips with the guys, when they sit down to eat, which I'm not saying it's not possible, but in some ways it's just inconsistent. Soda. It's like just window dressing. They're not really fleshing out this character for what he's all about, because to them, to the status quo, these people don't count. They aren't really important. They're not playing by the rules. They're outside. And so he's kind of a villain in another way. He's sort of obnoxious. And then at the I don't know if I want to give away, but his whole thing of like, he then turns out to be this amazing person who's like traveled the world, but then it's like, not. He can't be that kind of person. You have to bring him down and knock him down to like a trashy nobody. You can never really succeed with that.
You can never really do that. You can never really explore anything worth exploring, because people don't really do that. And people who do are full of shit.
Yeah.
Wow. No, you are dead on with your analysis of this movie. You are dead on.
Well, and then the last one that we saw last night, the one reunion that's out in theaters right now, and then we should probably switch over to Vanya, but maybe not. We probably could cover Vanya in about 5 minutes. Yeah. Unless, is there more that we should talk about after this?
It looks like we can probably fit in Vanya for about 5 minutes, and we can go over our bullet points for about 10.
Oh, okay. So, we'll go into Vanya in a second. I was just going to make one last point about the reunion film. Is that it really played like a reunion, a 10-year reunion, which I've videotaped as a job. I videotaped reunions, probably like 5 reunions. And I'll tell you, they are very intense experiences, because you actually see aging. You actually see the aging process, and to see all of these characters, all of these human beings who are actors, but they're also human beings, to see how they have changed in 10 years is, and to watch it, like, because I watched them all in a row, it was gradual changes from the first 3, because they happened within a span of about 4 or 5 years. Yeah. But then we jumped 9 years. Yep. And everybody aged a lot, and I was shocked at how. And these people are 10 years younger than me.
Yeah,
and most of them, except for like Eugene Levy and the.
What I found most interesting was the way that they tried to cover up the aging process in this film, especially with Chris Klein, and with Tara Reid and with Biggs. I mean, these people clearly are older, but I think that most of these actors, except for Allison Hannigan, who is in How I Met Your Mother, and she has an extremely successful career. Most of these people don't have anything else, with the exception of Eugene Levy, besides this film series, and the fact that there hasn't been one made in 9 years. And some of them don't even act anymore. So Mina Suvari, Chris Klein, Tara Reid, some of these people no longer have careers. So all bets were on with this movie. I mean, they really got into the best shape that they possibly could. They got plastic surgery in some cases.
Everyone was like,
it was just annoying.
Incredibly buff and everything for it.
And that in and of itself, I think, was a huge statement, for me at least, about how Hollywood acts. 1 minute you're completely irrelevant, and 1 minute you're completely important. In fact, you're special and you're wonderful. And if you don't make money, who cares? Who cares about you? And the way that these characters, sort of use their sexuality, use their body, and use their image to sort of come back, to maybe have one last stand, and maybe and maybe I'll be special again. Yeah. But it appeared as though that's probably not going to be the case of this film, that it didn't work, and they got into shape, and that's about the best that's probably going to come.
Well, I wanted to, before we quickly switch over, I wanted to point out one of just some of the inconsistencies that I saw through the series, because I don't think that they anticipated. Yeah. My sense is that they did not anticipate that they would be doing this again and again and again. Yeah. And so there's these weird things that happen if you watch the whole series in a row. First, one of them is the band girl that Jim marries.
Allison Hannigan.
Allison Hannigan. I think
is Michelle
in the film. She starts out being an Asperger's character.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's sort of like they're making fun of like, well, I would never have sex with a girl who's like a super nerd, like super intellectual, kind of like into mathematics and stuff like that. Asperger's-ish, like very OCD. Mm-hmm. But then turns out she's like a nymphomaniac. But what I really liked her character. I thought she was actually, in the first film, she was really good. Like her shtick was really strong. And that Asperger-ish person kept getting dumbed down from one to the next. And by the end, she's just a regular old boring Hollywood character. She lost all of that thing that she was doing, which I thought was so special. Like it was really, it stood on its own a little bit like Stifler's character. She had really developed something that was like unique and genuine. And I felt like they had to get rid of it because it was there's no way that he would really marry this woman who is OCD. That was just because it started out, she was written into the script as like, she's OCD. Of course, you don't want to have sex with the OCD girl. You want to have sex with that girl who's super tall and tan, But then over time, she became, they had to get rid of that. So that was one of the inconsistencies. The other one was this thing about dancing. What's his name? Jim was the main, that's Jim, right?
Yeah, it's the main character.
He's kind of like he's a central character, literally, in the sense that he was central in the status quo. He was the guy who gets married. He was the guy
who has a kid eventually.
Yeah, did he have a kid?
Yeah,
they had a kid. Yeah.
But he's barely in there. He's in there for like 4 seconds.
And he's the one who you see the most of his relationship with his dad and all that stuff. He's gets on this famous for this video where he's dancing.
Yeah.
And then by the end, it's like, oh, well, you're not going to make me dance, right? In the wedding one.
In American Wedding.
But then in the last one, in the reunion one, it's Oz who's the dancer, who's the great dancer. And he was like on American Idol or
Dancing with the Stars.
Dancing with the Stars show as this great dancer. But you never saw that in any of the previous series, really. Mm-hmm. Or did you?
No.
So it's just kind of strange, these things about that, and then it was Stifler who taught Jim how to dance. He's the one who had all these dance skills. Yeah. So I didn't understand the inconsistency of what was happening with the characters, and I think that's due to the fact that they probably just didn't anticipate that they were going to do another one.
They just
day.
threw things together.
Yeah. But they were, in other ways, everything was very, very tightly done. And you could tell they spent a lot of time kind of researching the past, doing little nods to past jokes and stuff like that.
Sorry I couldn't make it for your wedding was particularly obnoxious.
Okay, so anyway, I could go on forever about this, but
yes, I noticed.
And it was fun. I learned a lot watching the series, and also I learned a lot about. There is something, I think, another phenomenon that's happening in cinema, and especially with HBO series, is that we've gone from films being the equivalent of short stories in like Chekhov style short stories to more like Dickensian novels, and that you can flesh out characters much more when you do a series where it's hundreds of hours or whatever, where it's, or maybe not 100 hours, but where you have
hundreds of minutes.
Many. It's not just we're no longer stuck.
It's not just one entry.
We're stuck in the 90-minute format, but the 90-minute format can repeat in a series for however long, and you can end up having these really deep connections with character that you get with novels,
whether the characters
you couldn't get with short stories.
Whether the characters are that deep or not, you can have deep connections that resonate with you and that you can relate to. I know that there are a lot of kids who are younger, of the age and older than Jim and the central cast character, and even though they're not the deepest characters in the world, you root for them and you can relate to them, or you can almost wish that you were in that situation, long for that being in the past, long for that or wish for that being in the future. The choices you're going to make, being younger than being of high school age, being in high school and watching part 2, wishing you were in college, being in college and part 3 comes out and wishing that you had someone you were in love with that you could marry and someday have children with, and then being in the tedium of 22 of the Twixter age, and wishing that it was already time for your high school reunion, or that it had been 10 years since you graduated high school.
Yeah.
Pre, post, and of the status quo. Yeah, I mean, I think these films are definitely relevant timepieces of our age and the
sort of the zeitgeist.
The zeitgeist of it, yeah.
This
for better or
period,
for worse.
of the period of time whenever it came out. It's fun to watch people using videotapes instead of DVDs or Blu-ray discs. And but then now in the new one, everyone's using iPhones. But in the first ones, everyone's using portable phones, things like that. I just hope that they don't make any more. I hope
it's
this thing is dead.
I really think it's time for it to just be here.
It would freak me out if they had another one soon. Okay, so
American
Vanya.
Divorce, yeah.
Vanya on 42nd Street.
So we watched Vanya on 42nd Street, which is a film directed by Louis Malle, the great French director who has made all sorts of movies. Les Enfants, how do you pronounce that? Les Enfants?
Les Enfants Terribles, maybe?
Yes, thank you. That is his most famous film, from 1989. And Vanya on 42nd Street is a rendition of Uncle Vanya, Chekhov's play, as redone by David Mamet and a troupe of actors who just love this play so much. And it's a semi-documentary look at it. It's obviously done with a couple of multi-takes, a couple of revisionments, and a couple of post-production gloss. But it's meant to be a documentary of sorts. And a group of actors who just love and adore this play so much just get together once in a while and they just perform it just for the heck of it and practice their acting chops. And Louis Malle decided he wanted to film it. It works and it completely doesn't work. The play in and of itself is great. It's fine. It's wonderful. But it's the technique that Malle uses to film it that I found completely obnoxious. And it's full of contradictions. It's cute, but it's ugly. It's intellectual, but it's stupid. It's graceful, but it's forced. Performances are completely overanalyzed, overacted, but it's all an attempt for this sort of off-the-cuff naturalism, and it never really comes through because everything is so overdone, so over-rehearsed, so overdone that it never feels fun. It never feels natural. It never feels like anyone's enjoying themselves, to be honest. And the play in and of itself is a perfectly pleasant attack on social roles and on social mores and on the elite, but it completely exudes elitism from beginning to end and tons of pretension. And it's an attempt at simplicity and filth in some ways, and sort of this sort of attempting this lower class mores, sort of rooting for the underdogs, but it's just too polished and mannered really to work in the end. And these actors are way too refined to exude the qualities that I think they all think they have. And it's unaware of this. And so it becomes sort of silly. It's almost its own mockumentary in a way. It's extremely well made. It's extremely well shot, extremely well lit. But ultimately, I thought it was pretty dull and unsurprising and unfulfilling. I was bored senseless by the end of this, despite the story and the play being absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I felt pretty similarly about that one. About the Vanya on 42nd Street. Au revoir, les enfants was the film that you were thinking of earlier. But I really like a lot of Louis Malle films. I like Murmur of the Heart.
Murmur of the Heart is amazing.
And his documentaries are really great. We have...
the ones in India, especially.
Yeah.
His travel logs are especially amazing, and they're very little known.
Phantom India. Yep. There's Phantom India, and then there's God's Country, which is a really good documentary
God's
on
Country
America
is amazing.
From a French point of view.
Powerful, yeah.
And The Pursuit of Happiness. Those are all great documentaries. And then, okay, so what I saw with Vanya on 42nd Street was a shoddy version of what My Dinner with Andre does.
Yes.
My Dinner with Andre is, even though it's they're very different, but in a way, they not much happens in them. They're kind of like experiments and not much happening type of film. I feel like My Dinner with Andre was probably a little bit inspired by Warhol in some ways. and it's a groundbreaking film.
It's an amazing film,
Yeah,
but
and-
but in that very little happens in it. A lot happens in that movie, whereas not a whole lot
basically,
happens in
it's
this
not very
film.
different from this show. It's like two people talking over dinner. It's really well.
We should start having dinner on this show. I think that we should really start having that
my
dinner.
dinner. Yeah, we should call it My Dinner with Gabe. Well, if you've ever seen My Dinner with Andre, you need to see My Breakfast with Blassie. Have you ever seen that?
No.
My Breakfast with Blassie is the it's a wrestler and who is it again? Pete, who's My Breakfast with Blassie? Andy Kaufman.
Oh, that's right.
Andy Kaufman
I have heard of this.
and Blassie, this wrestler.
No, I've never seen this.
It's really good. You should watch it.
Okay.
Anyway, My Dinner with Andre is great, but My Breakfast with Blassie is a really good antidote to everything that's all pompous and pretentious,
about My Dinner with Andre, which is my only problem
But then
with it.
My Dinner with Andre is way better than Vanya on 42nd Street as far as I'm concerned, because it's boring.
It's boring.
Vanya
It's
on 42nd
really boring.
Street is kind of annoying. And what I don't like about it is this sort of thing of overly lauding this little clique of New York actors that it just kind of there's just something a little embarrassing about it for me. You know, it's just like, and it wouldn't be a problem if it wasn't the fact that Criterion re-releases it, you know, as if it's this great, you know, I feel like Criterion is, you know, has taken it upon themselves to be the, I guess our time is almost up. Has taken it upon themselves to be the, what do you call that? The thing you go to
The most
for
pertinent
for,
epicenter
for important films.
of film epicenter of film culture.
Yeah, and it goes to show that that's just it's always a flawed formula. You can never be the end all be all of what is great in cinema. It never works. It's just and so I guess you got to always take things like that with a grain of salt, basically. But Vanya on 42nd Street to me is a great example of how Criterion falls short once in a while. You just can't trust them for like everything that they put on video to be great.
And I got to say that actually, all in all, I generally, in the general sense, enjoyed watching these American Pie movies more than I enjoyed watching Vanya and 42nd Street.
Yeah, I mean, in a certain sense, there's something to be said for the fact that, like, industry does, I mean, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of power, and money and power get you pretty much anything you want. And so these people can make this dumb, stupid film that warps children's minds, but they can do it with a lot of skill and a lot of craftsmanship, and everyone is just, it's all kind of relegated to like, oh, this is just a bunch of pulpy junk. Like it's just like a can of Coke that you crush and throw in the garbage when you're done. Where something like Vanya on 42nd Street is kind of antithetical to that, where it's like, this is special.
This is
even
so
though
important.
It's not.
It's so important.
Even though it's kind of just
it lacks
not
importance.
very well crafted. It's
Yeah.
not very well thought out in some ways. It's not very well done. It's not very interesting. But because the people who made it actually have their heart in it, that does count for something.
There's a glimmer of love in
Yeah.
a lot of scenes in that movie, but I just don't care. I'm sorry. I just thought it was so pretentious and and just an attempt at headiness, and it just came across completely the opposite.
Right.
So that is pretty much going to be our show for today.
Yeah.
On our next show, next week we do not have a show because my ad is taking over on Friday.
Yep.
Which is fine because we probably could use a week off because
Yeah.
we watched 5 movies this week in preparation this week for this show, which is actually more homework than most people would probably think.
It's a lot of fun homework, though. I love it.
I love watching movies.
I love
I
being
love watching
forced to
movies
watch
with Zav. I really look forward to it. It's one of my favorite things in the world to do now.
Yeah.
Instead of just hogging his time at the counter and screaming titles at him while he attempts to get work done. So, in 2 weeks, we will be reviewing The Cabin in the Woods. And we'll also be doing, we're going to have more of a conversation. I think I tried a new format of having most of my thoughts written down. And I actually have to say that I caught myself where I was trying to remember every little detail that I wanted to get across to you guys. And I think that us having that Zav and I having a conversation is what we wanted to broadcast. It's actually what we wanted to have. So I think having more of the one take, two take method, while it's a little more professional, and I think it's a little more similar to on-air shows, especially the show that's my inspiration, Sound Opinions on NPR, I think we're going to just do a little bit more of experimenting. I'm sorry if we drove you nuts with how much we say and like, but that's how we talk, and we'll work on it. And
we got to end this.